welcome to Crim City. I'm Mark Murray.
I'm Josh Hanrahan.
And this week we're going to have two very different stories. One involving a 95-year-old lady tasered. The other one,
A young man who's shot dead in what seems to be the latest organised crime killing in Sydney.
on Crim City this week. We're going to cover a couple of things. Horrendous story of a 95-year-old lady being tasered by police, which has caused a lot of controversy. And Josh, we're covering another shooting.
Yeah, it's been 2 months since the last shooting.
See, we think that's a long time, which is ridiculous, isn't it? First off, we'll talk about the tasering, which has dominated the headlines. Late on Wednesday, there was a press release that went out to everybody in Sydney, and it said that a 95-year-old lady had received some injuries during an interaction with police, and it was now a critical incident. Now, you explain what a critical incident is?
Yeah, it essentially means that police are investigating themselves for something that's happened during their interaction with a member of the public. And what comes then is that they form
a little task force.
A little task force of detectives whose job is to investigate. We often get critical incidents when police have had to shoot somebody either fatally
or using their taser.
Or
I didn't realise they'll investigate the role of the police when they're called to the gap and there's a jumper. Now, if they jump while the police are within eyesight, those police are investigated. That's how broad the parameters are for a critical incident.
So the press release comes out on Wednesday night. We both had discussions with members of the police force who mentioned the use of a taser. And I think we both thought, taser? And this is late on Wednesday night. Bizarre. Anyway, coming the next morning, talking to somebody else, bang. First thing they said, what about this tasering of this grandma? And I remember calling you and going, we've missed the biggest story in the country today, Mods.
Not an infrequent thing.
Well,
actually, we caught it. We did miss it, but then we caught it and we broke it, luckily. Now, Thursday is when we really uncovered in detail what had actually happened.
Yeah, so the sequence of events is in the early hours of Wednesday morning, nursing home staff at Yallambee Lodge in Cooma, which is a small town in southern New South Wales, found a 95-year-old great-grandmother, Claire Noland, at her walking frame in the dementia ward of the nursing home carrying a steak knife. I'm not quite sure of what the discussions were between nursing home staff and Mrs. Noland, but what's eventuated is that police have been called. And when they've arrived, they have had discussions with Mrs. Noland and attempted to get her to drop the knife. For whatever reason, that has then escalated, which I think is a fair word. I know it's still under investigation, but clearly from talking to pulling out a taser and firing it at a 95-year-old woman, that's a fair escalation. Mrs. Noland has fallen to the ground, hit her head, suffered a fractured skull, and has bleeding on the brain. And there's been a lot of focus on the initial police release that didn't mention the use of a taser and simply mentioned an interaction. The police commissioner, and it's not her job to put releases out, but I know she was aware of it. Her view is that they wanted Mrs. Noland is, I think she's one of more than a dozen children. She has that many grandchildren. It's a huge family, right? And they wanted to make sure everybody knew, and they didn't necessarily want all the details out there. So that's their view.
When we did start on this, I rang a person I knew in Cooma, and he said, mate, I'm stunned you didn't know before this. And he had just been at the hospital. He said, I saw the family there, and they're just in total disbelief. So how they thought this would be contained when you have a town, and it's not a dot on the map, it's a fairly significant town, and the whole town was starting to talk about it. So I think police didn't want it out until they were really ready.
Yeah.
We back the police nearly all the time, and occasionally we've got to see when they've made mistakes. And I think in this one, they made a error. I don't know how you could have dressed it up any other way. It's just become an issue that is gathered because of the way they tried to handle it at the beginning. There's a view in the community when police shoot, they always say, oh, why don't they shoot them in the shoulder? I do remember one case where a guy was coming towards the cops with a knife, the cop put 6 in him, and the guy on adrenaline still knifed him. Now, I think a 95-year-old lady is different, especially when she weighs like 43 kilos. But
Well, the police training is that within 7 metres.
is this when you trained to be a cop and failed, obviously? I wouldn't know, within 7 metres, you know all
Was
the
that
rules.
rumor on TikTok that I used to be a detective on the North Shore? I don't know at which point they thought I had time to, in my young life, had time to join the police force and rise up to be a detective and then come over to journalism. Anyway, the specifics of police training are that within 7 metres, if you've got an offender armed with a knife, you're trained to reach for your firearm. And that's because by the time you start firing, they can make that 7 metre distance to you and can still harm an officer. But obviously they didn't go for their firearm.
They'd be in a lot more trouble. I mean, they're struggling as they are to explain hitting a 95-year-old with a taser.
You can't believe that it's real. The police commissioner this morning said that she's never seen anything like it. And that's what every cop you speak to says. They can't believe it.
It's the first real crisis to actually hit Commissioner Webb. This is the first time that the criticism has been levelled at police. The handling even afterwards of the publicity has also come under scrutiny. And it's not going to die down. For a start, the internal investigation, criminal charges against the officer. So then there can be a court case. There will be a law enforcement commission.
That could still take weeks. They need to wait for the weapons training unit to come back. And I guess a good point to probably make is that people would think if you or I walked down the street tomorrow with a taser and tasered somebody, we'd be charged very quickly. The difference is we don't have a legal right to use a taser like a police officer does. So the weapons training unit will go through the body-worn footage and every other bit of evidence that they've got and look at whether, in their view, it was used appropriately.
This will drag on. It's going to be constantly revisited in the public forum. And so it's a bit of a test for Karen Webb.
Moz, we'd been on the phone repeatedly on Monday. You're at home with a broken shoulder after...
Well, fractured. It wasn't broken. Fractured in 2 places, perhaps after a long lunch on Friday.
Yeah, maybe.
Where I was out doing my job trying to foster contacts and get out there in the city. And it ended tragically. But yeah, so I was there on Monday and you were ringing when you got a tip.
Yeah, we'd just broken the story about the identity of the police officer who's under investigation for the Coomber incident when I got a phone call from somebody saying there's been a shooting at Elizabeth Hills. I said, oh, like bad? And they said, yeah, someone's shot dead.
That is bad.
That is bad. Call somebody else. They go, yeah. And did you hear about the burnt out car? Straight away you go, okay, we're on here.
Yeah.
Something big has happened. In the last 2.5 years, there's been 16 underworld-related shootings, but there's one common denominator in all these shootings other than the gun and the bullet.
And the dead person.
Yeah, it's the burnt-out car. And so I remember calling you and...
When you said it was out near Liverpool, that is Como territory, and there's also quite a few young Assyrian gangs there between Fairfield and Liverpool. They're huge. So I didn't think it was related to what we've been covering for 2 years, the Hamsey Alameddines. But then it started to filter that it was, in fact, loosely related to the common territory. You were hearing that, weren't you?
Yeah, so we'll give a quick rundown of exactly
what happened, yeah.
Marvin Araya is a 24-year-old. He drives home with his partner into his home on Hertfordshire Street in Elizabeth Hills. As they pull into the driveway, gunmen pull up behind them, jump out and open fire. The woman who's with him manages to, thankfully, run away and not get injured, but he's shot dead. He's shot in the head and is pronounced dead on the scene. Neighbours initially run to help. Police are then on the scene before paramedics. They try to provide CPR, but there's nothing that can be done. From the scene, the gunmen drive to a neighbouring suburb called Green Valley, where they ditch an Audi, the car they did the shooting in, which had fake number plates on it. Drove to Green Valley, set it on fire, had another car waiting, which was an SUV, drove that to Bonnyrigg Heights, which is another nearby suburb. 6 minutes later, get out of that, set it on fire, and get into another car and drive away into the evening. 2 burnt out cars.
And you got to remember, you're talking the Audis, the high-end cars used in very professional hits.
Yeah.
This isn't someone getting the shits and doing a drive-by. It's well orchestrated, planned. It's a high-end hit.
Yeah, 100%. Premeditated and very well organised. begin talking to police sources who say, yeah, you're going to be interested in this one. He's got links to bikies. We're just trying to work out exactly who he is. And so we're going, wow, who is it? We're trying to get a name. And normally within
20, 30,
yeah, 20-something minutes, we had the name. This one took a couple of hours.
It did. And eventually it was an underworld person that came to us that gave us the initial name, which we had confirmed. And even the underworld person who has so many bikie contacts, he said, we haven't really heard of him.
No. The name Marvin Araya wasn't known to us. It wasn't known to police. That's what they told us last night. There was a few times it might have come across their desk, but they were saying, Marvin who? He's not a high-ranking bikie by any means.
Another person said, there's a rumour that this person's involved in some sort of drug rip.
Mm-hmm.
There's another that he may be linked to somebody that's going to have a court appearance. Has he talked about something he shouldn't have?
Mm-hmm.
So they're the rumours.
There's those suggestions, as you said, Moz. There's also always the possibility that it's a case of mistaken identity. But, this looks very, very well planned out at this stage. You don't go setting up 2 burnt-out cars, 2 gunmen, a getaway car. If it is a mistake, it's a very costly one.
Yeah. Again, you look at it, broad daylight, potentially didn't care if they got an innocent person, like that his partner could have been taken out. These guys are just at the next level. I know 1 or 2 guys that have gone overseas, not the major players, but guys that are kind of involved in the underworld. And they're just saying there are so many people out there, anywhere up to 10, 15 young crews who are willing to do these hits, willing to kill. And he says, mate, it's just not safe at times. If you get involved in a minor dispute, someone's going to come after you. Mm-hmm. But it makes you wonder, to go to the extent to get this guy, what has he been involved in?
Police do know that he had some links to the Comanchero. Now, that could simply mean that he knows people who are members. It doesn't mean he is, at all. So it's going to be a really, really interesting one. The crazy thing is that public place shootings in New South Wales are down massively. The police are doing, in my opinion, a fantastic job.
I did say to a couple of senior guys, I said, mate, you guys are putting us out of business. You've really come down on them.
The trouble is that when these shootings happen now, look at this one. They're so meticulously planned that they end in fatalities a lot more than the old drive-by.
This one could be a personal dispute. He could have ripped somebody off. He's obviously played with the wrong people. So now it's about, is this shooting going to lead to further shootings?
Totally. If we do find out that he does have strong links to the Comanchero, police allege they've had their fingerprints all over this gangland war in the last few years. Retaliation has been a frequent trend as well. I mean, I guess we should probably fess up. The truth is we don't know.
No.
I think you have to feel a little bit for the police commissioner.
So Monday morning, she spent most of her time trying to put the community at ease that they're going to properly investigate and try to explain why a 95-year-old lady on a Zimmer frame is tasered.
And then on Tuesday morning, she's trying to put the community at ease about just another shooting in Sydney's western suburbs.
Yeah, so she's really earning her money, which is fucking enormous. Thanks for listening to Crim City. I'm Mark Murray.
I'm Josh Hanrahan. This episode's been produced and edited by Jasper Leake.
And executive producer Dan Box.
As always, you can see us weekly on TikTok. We go by the same name there, Crim City, but that's on the Daily Telegraph's TikTok page. For more crime stories, go to dailytelegraph.com.au.